Boston tests the balance. Joe Barboza's betrayal didn't just damage the New England Mafia, it changed the atmosphere around it. Silence was no longer guaranteed, and once that certainty disappeared, power had to be tested. Boston was the first place to feel it. For decades, Providence had been the center of gravity. The Patriarca family didn't just control Rhode Island, they oversaw a regional structure that extended into Massachusetts and beyond. Boston operated within that structure, but never entirely comfortably. It had its own criminal ecosystem, its own crews, and its own traditions that didn't always align with Italian hierarchy. The balance worked because Providence enforced it. But after Barboza, that enforcement felt heavier, slower, more cautious. Providence had to turn inward, protecting leadership, managing damage, watching for more cracks. And when power looks distracted, it invites pressure. Boston noticed. The city wasn't controlled by one organization. Italian crews overlapped with Irish gangs, independent operators, and hybrid alliances that moved differently than traditional mafia families. The Winter Hill Gang, in particular, had never fully accepted outside authority. They cooperated when it made sense and resisted when it didn't. What changed after Barboza wasn't loyalty, it was confidence. Boston crews began testing boundaries, not openly, not violently, subtle moves, pushing into rackets that once required approval, delaying payments, negotiating harder, watching to see what would be enforced and what would be tolerated. Providence still had power, but it now had to prove it. Meetings grew quieter. Decisions took longer. Orders were delivered indirectly. Trust was no longer automatic. It had to be assessed, and assessment creates hesitation. For Irish crews, this mattered. They weren't bound by omertà. They didn't share the same fear of internal discipline. What they respected wasn't tradition, it was leverage, and leverage was becoming visible. This wasn't rebellion, it was positioning. Because when a structure weakens, the first move isn't war, it's testing. And testing always comes before escalation. New England was no longer operating as a single silent machine. It was becoming a contested space, one where authority could be questioned and consequences were no longer immediate. Episode 3 isn't about a single clash or a single gang. It's about what happens when power stops being absolute, and everyone realizes the old rules may not hold. Two worlds, one city. Boston didn't just challenge Providence because of ambition. It challenged Providence because it was built differently. Italian Mafia power depended on hierarchy, approval, structure, silence. Boston's Irish crews didn't operate that way. Groups like the Winter Hill Gang weren't interested in tradition or titles. They weren't raised on omertà. They didn't wait for permission unless it benefited them. Their loyalty was personal, not institutional, and that made them unpredictable. For years, coexistence worked because boundaries were understood. Italians controlled certain rackets. Irish crews controlled others. When lines blurred, Providence stepped in quietly and reset the balance. But after Barboza, that reset button didn't feel as reliable. Irish crews noticed something important. Enforcement had slowed, not disappeared, but softened. That hesitation mattered, because hesitation tells opportunists exactly how far they can push. Boston's underworld became a place where rules were negotiated instead of obeyed. Agreements became temporary. Respect became conditional. And when respect becomes conditional, it stops being protection and starts becoming leverage. Providence still expected deference. Boston began expecting concessions. This wasn't about disrespect. It was about momentum. Italian crews still had numbers, reach, and history. But Irish crews had flexibility. They adapted faster. They moved quicker. And they didn't fear internal punishment the same way mafia soldiers did. That difference created friction. Meetings grew tense. Messages got misunderstood. Silence, once calming, now felt suspicious. Every delay carried meaning. Every unanswered request felt intentional. Both sides were watching the same thing happen and interpreting it differently. Providence saw disobedience. Boston saw opportunity. And neither side believed the other would make the first violent move. That belief was the most dangerous thing of all. When balance becomes illusion, power doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, quietly, in moments that don't look dramatic until it's too late. By the time Providence realized the balance was shifting, Boston had already adjusted to it. The testing had done its job. Lines that once felt solid now felt movable. Authority that once felt automatic now required reminders, and reminders create tension. Italian leadership still believed structure would hold, that history would correct the moment, that tradition alone carried weight. But Boston's crews weren't measuring power by tradition anymore. They were measuring it by response time, by enforcement, by consequence. And those consequences were arriving slower than before. Each delay sent a signal. Each compromise rewrote an expectation. What had once been a single regional machine was now operating as overlapping systems with different rules. Providence spoke in hierarchy. Boston responded in leverage. And neither side was fully wrong, which made conflict unavoidable. Because when two power structures operate on different logic, they can only coexist temporarily. Violence didn't start immediately. It never does. First came confrontations without blood. Warnings without follow-through. Moves meant to intimidate, not destroy. But intimidation only works when it's believed. Behind closed doors, confidence was fading. Not publicly, not openly, but internally. The question was no longer who controls New England. It was who's willing to prove it. That's the moment every criminal ecosystem reaches before collapse or transformation. Providence still had the crown. Boston now believed the crown could be tested, and once that belief takes hold, restraint becomes impossible. Episode 3 ends here, at the exact moment when balance stops being real and starts being remembered. Because what comes next isn't negotiation, it's violence. And the next chapter of this story isn't about silence, structure, or testing. It's about blood, alliances, and consequences that can't be undone.
Joseph Barboza's corner in East Boston was a magnet for desperate people who needed money fast and couldn't get it elsewhere. Interest, or vigorish, was high, and the collection methods were low. But Barboza claimed he always warned the customers first.
When we made the deal, I tell every person, don't take this money if you can't pay it every week. I prefer you not take this money because it can lead you into trouble.
If a customer did take the money and couldn't pay it back, there was trouble.
This was almost typical. If a guy was 7 weeks late, say in the area of six or 7 weeks late, and he was hiding, and I found him, I said, I threatened him, and I told him that you better come down the corner and straighten this out. Now the fellow would continue hiding because he didn't have the money. And I could not accept, I could not let myself accept that he was in trouble. So that I stabbed guys after 14 weeks that still continue to hide. You know, I stabbed them in the face, I stabbed them in the legs, I stabbed them in the arms, I stabbed them in the chest. You understand?
Barboza and other loan sharks justify this kind of treatment on the basis of the deal.